Afternoon, everyone, and thanks for inviting me. You certainly get well fed here in Northern Ireland, I do note that. And I also note that you get a very good quality of debate about supporting people here. So if you do unring fence it or change the administrative arrangements in any way, do carry on with this sort of get-together, because I can tell you there's English local authorities now that wouldn't have the brains in a room together who are so focused on all of this stuff. So it's been a fascinating morning, and I hope I can continue to hold your interest. I'll just start by saying a very brief word about SITRA. You can obviously follow up this information on the website, or Wendy tells me at the registration desk, there's a very nice goodie bag, there you are, the right way round, with a SITRA bulletin, which is the monthly magazine and other information about SITRA that you might find of interest. So I'd urge you to pick up one of those as you go along. Okay, the project. I'd like to start by thanking the NICVA for commissioning the work. We had some quite lengthy discussions with Owen, who's here in the corner and can answer questions, I'm sure, over coffee, about which methodology to use and how to approach this. And in the end, we feel that we've settled on a robust and well-established methodology that I'll go on to describe to you in a minute. The project's being carried out by SITRA, and we've been given crucial advice and information from a number of sources, including the NIFHA, and you asked a lot of your members to contribute information. Thanks to anyone who's done that from the provider organisations. Northern Ireland Housing Executive have supplied the supporting people expenditure figures, and we've got a number of other contacts helping us with other crucial information, because the whole art to this is to populate the model, which I will describe to you, don't worry, to populate that model with costs from Northern Ireland. So if there's anything as you go along, and I'll remind you about this, but if there's anything as we go along you think, I know about that, or I know who knows about that, then please get in contact by email or call me over the tea break or whatever. Be most helpful. The model is quite a long-established one, developed by Capgemini on behalf of the CLG in England. If you want to follow it up in detail, and there are people who like this sort of thing and people who don't, to be frank, but if you want to follow it up in detail, follow that link, and it isn't that bad. The spreadsheet's quite bad, but you can kind of leave that to me if you like. But the actual report explains it all quite well. So if you've got a question like, I wonder if they took account of the cost of community nurses or something. I may be able to remember that, or I may not, but it will certainly be on there. If you've got that sort of question, I shall try, but it's a very thorough piece of work, and it does do what it says on the tin, and it is reasonably self-explanatory for the informed user. Now, I shall try and describe it in a nutshell. Now, the object here is to see whether money spent on supporting people services is money well spent. And in terms of cost-benefit analysis, the crux of the matter is normally expressed as a ratio, i.e. you spend £1 on supporting people, does that save £1 or more elsewhere in the public purse? If it does, you've got a cost-benefit. If it doesn't, you haven't. So if it's saving £1.10, or it's Mr. McCorber, isn't it? If it was saving £1 and 1 penny, it would be good news. If it was saving 99p, it wouldn't be such good news, to put it crudely. And all you have to look at is what is the full cost of services now. Now, I must emphasise here that that's not just the supporting people investment. That's the cost of all services that are received by the service users who are supported by supporting people. It takes account, say, for instance, of somebody who gets support through supporting people and domiciliary care, or support through supporting people and housing benefit, etc., etc. It's comparing the full cost to the public purse in a scenario where supporting people is available to a scenario which would be likely if supporting people were taken away. And as I say, if you look at the difference, you can determine whether there's a cost benefit or not. So it's all relevant services provided to supporting people, service users, versus what would be likely to be the case if the supporting people element wasn't there. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a worked example later. But why this model? Well, it's established and research-based, long established since about 2009 was its latest incarnation, when Capgemini developed it in a manner whereby it could be used at the local or the regional or the national sort of level and across all client groups. It's in the public domain, so if you think, you know, who's this Phil Saunders, he might be a bit of a charlatan, a bit of a quack, you can actually, if you can be bothered, go and look at the spreadsheet and see what it does and fiddle about with it and see what makes a difference, etc., etc. It provides a consistent level playing field. You can argue about whether Capgemini is the best methodology or not, and there are others. But one thing you can say for it for definite is that it looks at all supporting people services using the same concepts and the same methodology. So at the very least, it gives you a good comparison against different kinds of client group and different kinds of service. I'd argue it goes further than that, but it is good that it looks at everything consistently, works at local and client group levels, and it attributes the savings to the public purse by sector. So you can look at whether it's the health sector that's benefiting, the criminal justice sector that's benefiting, the housing sector, or whatever. Are there limitations to it? There certainly are. It doesn't look at the non-financial benefits. It doesn't purport to. It doesn't look at outcomes. It doesn't look at quality of life. Or social return on investment or anything like that. It's a purely economic tool that looks at whether supporting people is saving money to the public purse. It doesn't take account of self-funders. Now, I don't know how big an issue that is, but say, for instance, saving the cost of residential care. If that was for a self-payer, that would be a saving to them and not to the public sector, if you like. So, if that's a huge issue, you know, it's just something that has to be borne in mind, that you can't automatically say this particular instance results in a saving to health, social services or whatever. There might be some self-payers that are in there as well that are benefiting. And it doesn't attribute the savings to specific budgets. So when I say it looks at savings to crime cost, you can't just say, oh, that's prison, or oh, that's probation, or oh, that's the police. It looks, if you look at the methodology on the link there, you'll find it looks at all the costs associated with being a victim of crime or committing a crime. It looks at all the costs associated with becoming homeless. It looks at all the costs associated with reverting to substance misuse. It's not primarily driven by the fact that I want to know whether it's the council or the executive or whatever, you know, who are saving the money. So, you know, you have to bear in mind its pros and cons, and it does what it says on the tin. Okay, some terminology which is important in order to be able to understand it. I talked about the scenario where SP provides services and the scenario where it didn't. Well, the scenario where SP services are available is called the baseline scenario. So what you do is you quantify what it's costing now. So to the executive figures on supporting people expenditure, we've added the estimated cost of the other services that people who are benefiting from supporting people get. Now, the thing you compare that to, and this is the jargon term, but there's no way around it, it's called the counterfactual scenario. So it's what would happen, what would the world be like if supporting people wasn't there? And you compare those two together, take the counterfactual minus the baseline, and see whether there's a net benefit. The whole thing relies on research-based concepts. So you've got the cost of provision plus what's called event costs, because people can receive a service regardless of whether they're benefiting from supporting people. People can receive a service because that's a planned thing, like they've got domiciliary care coming in on a regular basis or something like that, or they can need a service because of what's termed in the methodology an adverse event takes place. So to take a fairly common example, if an older person experiences a fall, they may need hospital treatment unexpectedly. If that's in any sense avoided by the provision of supporting people, then the methodology takes it into account. So when I say it's the supporting people plus the cost of services people get, it's the planned services and the services they're likely to need if adverse events happen. Because we always talk about supporting people being preventative, don't we? It prevents bad things happening, to put it crudely, and the model takes account of the extent to which supporting people achieves that. In the counterfactual scenario, you have to look at alternative provision because supporting people isn't there, and whether those adverse events are any more likely to happen. So again, to take a fairly common argument, most people would accept that if you're getting supporting people, you're less likely to experience homelessness or tenancy breakdown, say, than you are if you weren't. So the cost of that adverse event being more likely to happen to a person who's not being supported through SP is included and taken into account in the model through the event costs being ranked as more likely. You also have to think about what kind of alternative provision you'd make for someone. One of the things I really like about this model is that you can't just make people go away. You've got vulnerable people out there in the community. You can't just say, no, we're not going to provide for them. You have to think, if you didn't do supporting people, what would you do as an alternative? And as you'll come to see, that in the financial analysis, a lot of those alternatives are more expensive than supporting people and perhaps less desirable in terms of the type of provision they are as well. So let's look at a concrete example because it makes it easier to get your head round. And a good example here is mental health because it looks at mental health in quite a sophisticated way. And what the model says is that if supporting people wasn't available, people would need different kinds of alternative provision. It doesn't just crudely say, actually, well, the only alternative is hospital or the only alternative is residential care. It says 59% of people would probably get a similar kind of package that they do at the moment, but without the supporting people input. 8% would need some form of residential care, and 33% would need hospital care. Now, you can argue with that, and you can change it if you like, but it's a research-based set of assumptions that are built into the model so that you don't overstate the benefits of supporting people by saying the only alternative are very expensive residential packages. Again, in the instance of mental health, it talks about the event costs probably being higher if supporting people is not available. So you're more likely to get people experiencing housing problems such as tenancy breakdown, you're more likely to get people becoming homeless, and you're more likely to get people calling on the health service in other ways than just their residential package. You know, this can be A&E, this can be GPs, this is the whole health service. What it does is quantify the impact of the fact that actually if you take away supporting people, down the left-hand side, or whatever way, yes, it is the left-hand side, isn't it? On the right-hand side, you're likely to be getting increased costs in the health service, in the criminal justice system, etc. Okay, so what we did is we put every bit of supporting people expenditure that the executive provided us with through the model to see what would happen. And I'm going to say what it showed. Okay, so the supporting people costs we were given as 65.6 million, which isn't the figure that Brian put up earlier on today, but I checked with him to make sure it was probably right. There's quite a few projects in that in the pipeline that add up to the 72 odd that he was talking about. So supporting people, for starters, is costing in the model about 65.6 million. You then have to add to that the other costs of the service, the costs of the other services that those service users are benefiting from, and that comes to 554.5 million. So it's much more. You know, people who are benefiting from supporting people still get a lot of the other services that everybody else gets. That should come as no surprise, and that totals 620.1 million. You then look at the counterfactual scenario. Well, obviously, supporting people expenditure pounds 0 million. hooray or boo, depending on what sort of camp you're in, I suppose. So you've got that saving, you know, very tempting. Unring-fenced programme in England, certainly not here yet, luckily. You know, low-hanging fruit, it's been described as, again in England, quite tempting for government, for local authorities not to fund that. But what are the consequences? You're looking at £727 million in other costs arising because you've taken that supporting people element away. So by comparing those two figures, the 620 and the 727, you get a net benefit of 106.9 million to the public purse. It's not bad. I should emphasise these are interim findings. We need to firm up the figures, not the supporting people expenditure ones, they're firm, but some of the costs for the counterfactual scenario. But I'm relatively confident that here in Northern Ireland, supporting people is showing a good net benefit to the public purse. As I said, it's often expressed as a ratio. Expressed like that, and it's quite a nice way of putting it, every pound spent on supporting people saves the public purse £1.63. And again, that's not bad. As part of our literature review, we've researched a number of studies that have been carried out in England, Wales and Scotland, both at the sort of national and local authority levels, and that's not at all bad in terms of a cost-benefit return. When I say it's attributable to sectors, this is where it gets interesting. This shows you the breakdown of expenditure between, and I'll tell you what I mean, don't worry. It's the breakdown of expenditure that's different in the baseline scenario and the counterfactual scenario. And you can see that a really significant one, that yellow block there, that's the cost of residential packages that are needed for some of the service users who would need them if supporting people was taken away. So there's a big gain there in residential packages. There's a reasonable size one there in terms of crime costs. That's quite significant. They don't look that massive on that slide, but that's quite a significant difference there. And there's quite a significant difference in terms of the health costs. But this one's particularly interesting, given that the colleague this morning said that one of the major objectives was to move away from these nursing and residential care forms of provision. And they really are the only alternative for a percentage of service users. Not all of them, but enough of a percentage to make it very costly. So in terms of analysing the benefits then, that graph, and I'll come back to another one similar, you're looking at the savings in those areas across residential packages, against housing costs, homelessness costs, and Patrick earlier on made the point about how expensive it is to manage people who are homeless in the community. It's not a saving, it's actually an expense. Tenancy failure costs, costs to the health service, crime costs, benefits and related services, and some of that is the administration of benefit where people become dependent on them, and other things that aren't quite so material are taken into account, like charitable activity. So looked at another way then, that's what happens if you take supporting people away. You obviously save, whoops, wrong button. You obviously save the supporting people, very tempting, but look at that. You spend that, you spend that, you spend that, you spend that. Far outweighs any saving made by cutting supporting people back to the bone. There's just one I'll point out there. The model assumes that people getting supporting people services, some of them will also need domiciliary care, social domiciliary care. So obviously if you're not in a residential home, you are more likely to perhaps need some dom care on top of your supporting people. So again, you know, if there's a criticism, and it does get made, that Capgemini overstates the savings made, you can see how they've weighted it by taking account of those two there. So, good news, preliminary good news, supporting people, saving the public purse, £1.63 for every pound spent. I'm reasonably confident that that's in the kind of the right ballpark, but we've got some work to do. We need more information on the non-supporting people costs. So if anyone in the room has got a good source of information, particularly of costs on those residential packages, it would be really useful if they got in touch. Because, you know, we are using at the moment proxies that are drawn from English research, which we can use, but it would be nice to validate them or otherwise against the Northern Ireland figure. So we need to get more information on the non-supporting people costs. I'm pretty confident we're in the right ballpark, but we do need that. We need to validate them with some kind of review carried out by experts. We then need to do this for every client group, and it gets very interesting because you'll see some of the benefits are more significant for some client groups than others, and you do sometimes get the odd case, and I'll have to look at this, where it isn't really beneficial. You know, it doesn't tell a lie, it's a spreadsheet model, and if there's not a net benefit, it will say so. We will then be writing up a report of our findings in full, which will include the literature review on other ways that you can look at cost benefit as well. So, you know, I hope to be standing here or somewhere else in not too many weeks' time, reporting on the final validated model. And, you know, I hope the message will be that supporting people can be demonstrated to be good value for money in Northern Ireland, and I hope that's something that will be useful to you all in terms of taking forward your future strategy for the programme.